Reading from 1 Peter. Peter writes, "Beloved, I urge you," now let's go up here, "but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the desires of the flesh that wage war against the soul. Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that though they malign you as evildoers or whatever, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge." The word of the Lord. Well, as we are working our way through our understanding of Reformation and what that might mean for the church and for us here at First Lutheran, we come to the obvious question that we always ask on any kind of journey: how are we going to get there? What's going to be our modus operandi? What is going to mark this particular journey? I've had the fortune to be able to travel pretty much all across this country by various and many means. I've taken the train across this entire United States of America. I've taken planes, cars, I've walked, done just about everything. Haven't hit 2 states, haven't hit Arkansas, and for some reason I have never been to South Carolina. I've been to North Carolina and Georgia, but somehow I must have just skipped over it or something. Traveled, of course, internationally. So there's lots of different ways that we can travel. And one of the things to remember as we talk about traveling is that we're all in this together. For example, one time I was taking the train, and at this particular moment we were going through Ohio, heading from Cleveland towards Rochester, New York. And I went back to the lounge car, and now the train in the East Coast, they don't have those big double-decker lounge cars with the glass roof and stuff like that, because in the East Coast they built bridges, and if you did that, you'd make it probably to Erie, Pennsylvania before you lost your top half of your train car, because those bridges are kind of low-hanging. So the lounge car's a little cramped, and I sit with a young couple there, and I ask them what they're doing, and they say they celebrated their honeymoon, and I was like, "Oh, well, congratulations." They said, "Yeah, we went out to Vegas and got married." And I was like, "Oh, that's excellent. And how long have you known each other?" And they said, "Oh, since Friday." They'd met at Kent State, got on a train, went to Vegas, got married, and we're going back to class on Monday, I guess. Just the usual weekend in the life of a college student. Great story. Wow. Tons of traveling stories. But the point of what Peter is talking about is so important for our understanding about this journey that we take on the Reformation. And that is that we do it all together. You, he says, are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. And that means that when we begin to think about this Reformation, we have to understand, although God has changed our heart or changed our mind, and we have repented individually perhaps, we go as a people, we go as a congregation, we go as a priesthood, all of us together. And sometimes, of course, we get stuck in this Reformation thing that it's just about me. And even we can do that with Luther. We can think of Luther as some, lonely monk who stood up against this huge institution, some kind of, medieval version of David and Goliath. But that's to misread Martin Luther's place in history. That's to misread the understanding of the Reformation. Luther himself never saw himself as a little David against a mammoth Goliath. In fact, Luther often compared himself to Jan Hus, who just 100 years before Luther had said many of the same things that Luther himself had asked. To change, to be able to have both kinds of elements in Holy Communion, to be able to have a more open priesthood, to have all sorts of changes that Luther was advocating, but Jan Hus was executed. 100 years later, the political climate had so changed that when Martin Luther made those same suggestions, he became known as the leader of the Reformation. But the Reformation is not just about one lonely monk changing the way in which the church behaves. It's about a group of people who gathered together over time, People who gathered together and moved all of us to a new place where we can all ask questions about ourselves, where doubt is not something that is to be an antithesis of faith, but is to be an integral part of faith. To be able to ask questions is exactly what it means to be able to be in a reforming church, to be able to say, why God? To be able to say, what does this mean? To be able to say, are you kidding me? Is vital to our understanding of who God has made us as a people, as a holy nation, as a royal priesthood, as chosen ones of God. The impressive thing, for example, as a pastor, is not to see a person come to the communion rail and kneel or stand in reverence and awe for the gifts of grace and the body and blood of Jesus Christ. What's impressive is to see all of us come to the communion rail. Some of us come struggling. We're going to make it up here no matter how bad the arthritis is this day. Some of us can't do it and ask that the communion be brought to us, and we are more than happy to expand our understanding of communion so that everybody, even those who cannot make it actually to this rail, are included in the beneficence of God. We live as an understanding that we are doing this together. And the Reformation is not about just one or two of us making it to some kind of sacred holy ground, but it is about the church of God changing and transforming the world to be a place where we will all live in peace and hope. And this comes about in many and various ways. We bring our own individual gifts and talents to this. Because as a holy people, we are called to bring light to the darkness. We are called to help people be led from darkness into light. This is why God has blessed us in these waters of baptism. This is why this word has so articulated upon our ears and upon our souls to be able to transform us into this priesthood, into this holy nation, into these chosen people. So that when we go back through those doors, we bring light to a darkened world. And we're all going to do it a little differently. Some of you might do it with wonderful words or helpful actions. Some of you might be able to do it with the very things you're sitting on. Look at the wonder of these quilts that are here today. You'll hear later on that there's over 300 of them that adorn this church this morning, both in this particular room, out in our narthex, and in our Life Center. And I invite you not to just look at these, but to actually take some time and wander through the Life Center and see the intricate detail that has gone into making these quilts. People who have so far called that they feel the way in which people can be led from dark into light is to be able to have a warm blanket on a cold night, or to have something you can throw on a dirt floor so your children can go to sleep. There are a multitude of ways to be the holy people of God. And the ladies who have labored for these quilts are just offering and sharing their gifts. Because let us never forget that although there may be a lot of quilts here, it doesn't happen in every church. It doesn't happen in every congregation or every place where people gather. This is a special thing. And you may have gotten used to seeing these quilts here. You may have somehow said, oh, it's just quilts. But the world, God, understands that each quilt has a special person in mind. And we have no idea where this quilt is going or that quilt is going, but God understands that it will go to someone in need. And we are privileged to be able to live as the royal people who celebrate a gift that is, in this case, for us at least, as common as a quilt. To be able to live in the reality of the reforming church is to be able to live with a world that is constantly moving and changing. To be able to live with someone who is being able to gift the world with whatever light they can bring. And we live as those people, a chosen people, a holy nation, a royal priesthood. And we might not want it. We might think, you know what? That's a little bit too much of a burden for me. I don't want to do it. And that is certainly understandable. It does become a burden. For example, we all know in about 50 hours or so, it'll all be over. And you all know what I mean by that. I don't even have to say it. That's how bad it is. But you go into the sanctity of that voting booth, or maybe if you've already voted, you go as a member of the royal priesthood, the holy nation, the chosen people. There are many of our brothers and sisters throughout this globe who do not live in a country that allows them to cast a ballot. They don't ever get a chance to publicly witness to their faith what they think God is calling their particular country or their particular community to be about. They're never asked. But we are. And that's a burden. It's a burden to be able to go to those voting booths, to stand in line, to see all those signs from the other side, and to be able to say to yourself, wow, what a hassle when I could just be having a donut and coffee. Or even at work, having someone yell at me has got to be better than this. With privilege and responsibility comes our faith. Our faith is people who move together. Because the whole point of this is that come Wednesday, we're going to do this all together one way or another. Just like the church moves together, our country moves together, we all move together under the auspices of a God of love and grace. And we might not have ever asked for it. We might even resent it and get angry at being responsible for it. As my wife always used to say when we were younger and we had to be responsible for making the kids' holidays happen, who made us responsible for Christmas? When did I become an adult? We live in a world in which we have been chosen and graced by the very waters of baptism to live as free people, to live with people who continue to be a holy nation, a royal priesthood, a chosen one. But remember, we do it all together. That what you are asked to do is not just for yourself, but for all of us together, from those who are able to those who are not, from those who are wealthy to those who are not, from those who are discriminated against to those who are not. We are in this together, and you are a part of that, a vital cog in God's royal priesthood. So I invite you when you come forward to the altar today, when the sacrament of the body and blood of Jesus is offered to you, to remember that you are loved beyond your wildest imagination, and that God is not trying to stop you or anyone else from sharing that love, but rather God is encouraging you with God's own love to be the people God made you to be. Amen.